They called it the Morrison Christmas Mystery, until they realized it wasn't a mystery at all. It was an invitation. For 36 years, the abandoned house had been preparing for guests every December 25th. Fresh cookies appeared on the table. The tree lights flickered on at dawn. Presents materialized under the branches. When the demolition crew found the hidden 8mm film in 2024, they saw the truth. The Morrison family had been trying to show them something. Christmas morning 1988 was still happening, and they were all still there waiting for someone to join them. Welcome to Lost Mystery Stories. Before we unwrap this chilling tale of a Christmas that never ended, supernatural invitations, and a family trapped in their happiest moment, tell me in the comments, have you ever felt like someone was watching you during the holidays? And if you believe some celebrations should never end, hit that subscribe button because we're about to enter a house where December 25, 1988, is still happening. December 15, 2024. The snow fell gently on Maple Street, coating the sidewalks in pristine white and making the neighborhood look like a postcard. But there was one house that didn't quite fit the picture. Number 1247 stood at the end of the street, its windows dark, its yard overgrown, and yet, something was different. Sarah Chin pulled her coat tighter as she approached the Morrison house for the first time in 3 years. As the new real estate agent assigned to handle the property's final sale before demolition, she'd expected to find what she'd always seen before. An empty, decaying shell of a home that had been abandoned since 1988. Instead, she found Christmas lights. Not the faded, broken strings that might have been left behind by vandals or nostalgic neighbors. These were new. Bright. Perfectly arranged along the roofline and around the front windows. They weren't turned on in the afternoon light, but Sarah could tell they were recently installed. The extension cords looked fresh, snaking around the porch and disappearing somewhere behind the house. "That's impossible," she whispered, pulling out her phone to call the property management company. The phone rang twice before a bored voice answered. "Hartley Properties, this is Mike." "Mike, it's Sarah Chin. I'm at the Morrison property on Maple Street and someone's been here. There are Christmas decorations." Pause. "What kind of decorations?" "Lights. Professional-looking installation." "And?" Sarah walked closer to the front window, cupping her hands around her eyes to peer through the glass. Her breath caught. "Mike, there's a Christmas tree inside. A real one. It's decorated." "That's not possible. We've had that property secured for months. No one has access except the demolition crew, and they don't start until after the holidays." Sarah pressed her face closer to the window. The living room beyond was dusty and dim, but she could clearly see a tall Douglas fir standing in the corner where she remembered it being empty just 3 months ago. The tree was decorated with ornaments that caught what little light filtered through the dirty windows, red and gold balls, twinkling tinsel, and what looked like handmade decorations scattered throughout the branches. And beneath the tree wrapped presents. "Mike, I need to get inside. Right now. I'll meet you there in 20 minutes. Don't go in alone." But Sarah was already walking toward the back of the house, following the extension cord. It led to a basement window that had been pried open just wide enough for someone to slip inside. The metal frame showed fresh scratches, and there were footprints in the snow leading to and from the opening. Small footprints. Child-sized. She knelt beside the basement window and called out, "Hello? Is someone in there?" Her voice echoed in the empty space below, but there was no answer. Only the soft sound of something mechanical humming deep inside the house. Sarah checked her phone, still 15 minutes before Mike would arrive. She looked at the basement window again. The footprints in the snow were filled with fresh powder, meaning they'd been made recently. Within the last hour. Against her better judgment, Sarah lowered herself through the basement window. The basement was pitch black and smelled of old wood and something faintly sweet, cinnamon and vanilla, like someone had been baking cookies. Sarah used her phone's flashlight to navigate around stacked boxes and old furniture until she found the stairs leading up to the main floor. The humming sound grew louder as she climbed. She emerged into the kitchen, and her flashlight beam swept across something that made her stumble backward into the wall. On the kitchen table, arranged on a red and green placemat, were a plate of chocolate chip cookies and a glass of milk. The cookies looked fresh, still soft, with steam rising faintly in the cold air. The milk had condensation on the outside of the glass. Someone had been here minutes ago. "Hello?" Sarah called out louder this time. "I'm not going to hurt anyone. I just need to know if you're okay." She moved through the kitchen toward the living room, where she'd seen the Christmas tree from outside. Her footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors, but underneath the sound of her own movement, she could hear something else. Music. Faint and distant, but definitely there. Christmas music, played on what sounded like an old record player, complete with the soft pops and hisses of vinyl. The melody was Silver Bells, but played at a slower tempo than usual, almost like a lullaby. The living room door was closed. Sarah had never seen it closed before. In all her previous visits to show the property, every door in the house had stood open. She reached for the handle and turned it slowly. The Christmas tree was even more beautiful up close. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, decorated with ornaments that looked handmade, paper snowflakes, painted wooden figures, strings of popcorn and cranberries. The lights weren't electric. They were real candles in small holders, and somehow, impossibly, they were all lit. The presents beneath the tree were wrapped in paper that looked vintage, not retro-styled modern wrapping paper, but actual 1980s designs with patterns and colors that Sarah remembered from her own childhood. Some of the packages had been opened, their contents missing, but others remained perfectly wrapped with neat bows and gift tags written in careful cursive handwriting. Sarah picked up one of the tags. To Jimmy from Santa, it read. Another said to Mom Love, Jenny. A third was addressed to someone named Dad from Your Little Angel. The music was coming from an old stereo system in the corner, its LED display showing that it was playing a cassette tape. But the strangest thing wasn't the music or the tree or even the presents. It was the photographs. Scattered around the base of the tree were dozens of Polaroid pictures, some new-looking, others yellowed with age. Sarah picked up a handful and used her phone's light to examine them. They showed the same family in what appeared to be Christmas morning scenes. A father with dark hair and a mustache, a mother with blonde hair and a warm smile, a boy who looked about 10, and a girl who couldn't have been older than 7. They were opening presents, laughing, hugging each other. Normal family Christmas photos. Except in every single picture, their faces were slightly blurred, as if they'd been moving when the photo was taken. And in the background of each shot, barely visible in the corner of the frame, was a figure watching them. A figure that didn't seem to belong to the family. A figure that looked exactly like Sarah. She dropped the photos, her heart hammering in her chest. The music seemed to grow louder, and she realized it wasn't just Silver Bells, playing on repeat. It was an entire Christmas album, and she could hear voices now too, faint but distinct, coming from somewhere upstairs. Children's voices singing along with the music. Sarah backed toward the living room door, but it wouldn't open. She turned the handle, pushed, pulled, nothing. The door was locked from the outside, which was impossible since she'd just come through it. The singing upstairs grew louder, and she could make out the words now. Silver bells, it's Christmas time in the city. She tried the front door. Locked. The back door. Locked. Every window on the main floor had been painted shut years ago. The basement window. She could get out the same way she'd come in. Sarah ran back to the kitchen, but stopped short when she saw the table. The plate that had held cookies was now empty except for crumbs. The glass that had contained milk was empty except for a thin white residue at the bottom. And there was a new item on the table, a piece of paper with a message written in the same careful cursive handwriting she'd seen on the gift tags. Thank you for coming to our Christmas party, Sarah. We've been waiting so long for a guest. Please don't leave yet. We have something to show you. The paper was signed with 4 names: Richard, Margaret, Jimmy, and Jenny Morrison. The Morrison family. The family that had vanished on Christmas morning, 1988. The family that had been missing for 36 years. Sarah heard footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate, coming down from the second floor. She ran toward the basement door but found it locked as well. Every exit was sealed. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs and began moving toward the kitchen. Sarah grabbed a knife from the counter and pressed herself against the wall beside the doorway, heart pounding so hard she was sure whoever was coming would hear it. The footsteps stopped just outside the kitchen. Sarah? A woman's voice, warm and friendly. Are you hiding? There's no need to be afraid. We just want to show you what we found. A child's voice joined in, a little girl. We found movies, Sarah. Christmas movies. Would you like to watch them with us? Then a boy's voice. We have popcorn. And hot chocolate. Please don't be scared. Finally, a man's voice, deeper but just as gentle. We know this must be confusing. But we can explain everything. We found something in the attic and we think you should see it. Sarah pressed herself flatter against the wall. These voices sounded real, solid, not like ghosts or hallucinations. They sounded like an actual family trying to convince her to join them for a Christmas celebration. But the Morrison family had been missing for 36 years. Sarah, the woman's voice said again, closer now, we can hear your heartbeat. We know you're in the kitchen. Please come out. We promise we won't hurt you. We just want to share Christmas with someone, the little girl added. It's been so lonely, just the four of us. The man's voice, show her the film, Margaret. Yes, Richard. Sarah, we found something in the attic that explains everything. About what happened to us, about why we're still here, about why the house keeps preparing for Christmas. But you have to see it to believe it. Sarah heard the sound of footsteps moving away from the kitchen, back toward the living room. After a moment of silence, she heard the old stereo click off, and a new sound began, the mechanical whirring of a film projector starting up. Come to the living room, Sarah, the boy's voice called. We're starting the movie. Against every instinct telling her to find a way out immediately, Sarah found herself curious. If these were the Morrison family, somehow still alive after 36 years, somehow still in this house, what had they found in the attic? What could possibly explain any of this? She left the kitchen knife on the counter and walked slowly toward the living room. The living room had been transformed. The Christmas tree now glowed brighter, its candles casting dancing shadows on the walls. The presents beneath it seemed to have multiplied, and the Polaroid photographs were arranged in neat rows on the coffee table like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be solved. But the most striking change was the film projector. It sat on a small table in the center of the room, pointed toward a blank white sheet that had been hung on the far wall. The machine was old, probably from the 1970s or early 80s, but it appeared to be in perfect working condition. A reel of 8mm film was already threaded through the mechanism, and the projector's bright bulb cast a square of light on the makeshift screen. Sarah looked around the room, but she couldn't see the Morrison family anywhere. Their voices had been so clear, so close, but they were nowhere to be seen. We're here, Sarah, Margaret Morrison's voice said, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. We're always here. But we're hard to see sometimes, especially during the day. We're clearer in the projector light. Sarah looked at the bright square of light on the white sheet. At first, she saw nothing but empty brightness. But as her eyes adjusted, she began to make out faint shapes moving within the light, shadows of people, translucent and flickering like images on film. There, Richard Morrison's voice said with satisfaction. Can you see us now? The shadows became clearer. Sarah could make out the silhouettes of 4 people sitting in chairs arranged in front of the projector. A man, a woman, and 2 children. They were facing the screen, but she could see their profiles clearly enough to recognize them from the Polaroid photographs. They looked exactly as they had in 1988. The man still had his dark hair and mustache. The woman still had her blonde hair styled in the soft curls popular in the late 80s. The children looked 10 and 7 just as they had when they vanished. They hadn't aged a single day. How is this possible? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The film will show you, Jimmy Morrison said, his young voice carrying an excitement that was both innocent and deeply unsettling. We found it in the attic yesterday. It's all about us. Not yesterday, sweetheart, Margaret corrected gently. We found it on December 15, 2024. Today is December 15, 2024. We always find it on December 15th. Jenny, the little girl, giggled. Time is funny here, Sarah. It's always almost Christmas, but Christmas never ends. Richard reached toward the projector. Sarah could see his shadow hand moving toward the machine, and clicked a switch. The film began to roll. The first image that appeared on the screen was the Morrison house itself, but as it had looked in 1988. The exterior was well maintained, painted a cheerful yellow with white trim. Christmas decorations adorned the porch and roof. Snow covered the lawn and warm light glowed from every window. The camera, operated by someone unseen, moved closer to the house and then through the front door. The interior was exactly as Sarah had seen it moments ago, except everything was new and clean. The Christmas tree stood in the same corner, decorated with the same ornaments, surrounded by the same wrapped presents. This was filmed on Christmas Eve, 1988, Margaret's shadow voice explained. But not by us. The camera moved through the house, showing the kitchen with its Christmas cookies cooling on the counter, the dining room with its table set for Christmas dinner, the bedrooms upstairs with stockings hung from the mantelpieces. But in each room, the camera lingered on things the Morrison family couldn't have seen. Hidden cameras mounted in light fixtures. Microphones tucked behind picture frames. Recording equipment concealed in closets. "Someone was watching us," Richard said, his voice heavy with an emotion Sarah couldn't identify. "For weeks, maybe months before Christmas. Recording everything we did." The film continued, showing the Morrison family's Christmas Eve. They were laughing, cooking together, wrapping last-minute presents. They looked happy, normal, completely unaware that they were being observed and recorded. But Sarah noticed something else. In the background of many shots, barely visible in mirrors or reflections in windows, were additional figures. People who didn't belong in the house, standing in shadows, watching the family with an intensity that made Sarah's skin crawl. "Who are those people?" she asked. "We don't know," Jenny said sadly. "They never told us their names." The film jumped forward. Christmas morning, 1988. The Morrison family gathered around the tree at exactly 8:47 a.m., just as Sarah had read in the newspaper reports. They opened presents, took pictures, shared breakfast. Everything appeared normal until 9:15 a.m. At 9:15, the hidden watchers stepped out of the shadows. There were 4 of them, 3 men and a woman, all wearing identical dark clothing. They moved through the house silently, systematically, like they'd rehearsed this moment many times. The Morrison family didn't seem to see them, continuing their Christmas celebration as if nothing was happening. One of the watchers approached Richard Morrison while he was taking pictures of the children. The watcher placed a hand on Richard's shoulder, and Richard's expression suddenly went blank. He stopped taking pictures and stood perfectly still, staring at nothing. The same thing happened to Margaret, then to Jimmy, then to little Jenny. One by one, the watchers touched them, and one by one, the Morrison family stopped moving, stopped speaking, stopped celebrating Christmas. But they didn't disappear. They were still there, standing perfectly still in the living room, while the watchers moved around them, examining them like specimens. "What did they do to you?" Sarah asked, though she was beginning to suspect she didn't want to know the answer. "They preserved us," Margaret said, and there was an odd note of gratitude in her shadow voice. "They said our Christmas was too perfect to end. They said families like us were rare and we deserved to stay together forever." The film showed the watchers connecting cables to devices hidden throughout the house. Sarah realized they were activating some kind of recording system, not just cameras and microphones but something more sophisticated. Something that could capture not just images and sounds, but the essence of the moment itself. "They made us part of the house," Richard explained. "Our Christmas morning became the house's Christmas morning. Our joy became the house's joy. Our family became the house's family. But we're still celebrating," Jimmy added happily. "It's still Christmas morning 1988. It's always Christmas morning 1988. The film showed the final moments before the Morrison family faded from physical existence. The watchers gathered around them in a circle, holding hands, and began to speak words in a language Sarah didn't recognize. The air in the living room began to shimmer, and the Morrison family became translucent, then transparent, then invisible. But they were still there. Sarah could see their shadows moving on the film, could hear their voices continuing their Christmas celebration even after their bodies had vanished. The watchers packed up their equipment and left the house, but not before one of them, the woman, turned toward the hidden camera and smiled directly into the lens. Sarah gasped. The woman's face was older but unmistakably familiar. It was her own face, aged by perhaps 20 years, smiling with a satisfaction that chilled Sarah to the bone. "You've done this before," Margaret Morrison said gently. "You've been here before, Sarah. Many times." The film kept rolling, showing the house through the decades. Christmas after Christmas, the Morrison family's shadows celebrated in the living room while the house prepared itself for visitors. Neighbors, real estate agents, curious teenagers, paranormal investigators, they all came, drawn by the mystery of the family that had vanished on Christmas morning. And one by one they joined the celebration. Sarah saw herself in the film, her actual self, not the older version, entering the house on different occasions. Sometimes she looked younger, sometimes older. Sometimes her hair was different, sometimes she wore clothes Sarah didn't remember owning. But it was definitely her, returning to the Morrison house again and again, as if drawn by some force she couldn't resist. "How long have I been coming here?" she asked. Since 1989, Richard said. You were the first visitor after us. You were a child then, maybe 8 years old. You came trick-or-treating on Halloween, and the house called to you. Sarah watched her child self on the film, exploring the house with the fearless curiosity of youth. She saw herself finding the projection room in the attic, discovering the equipment the watchers had left behind, learning how to operate the machinery that kept the Morrison family suspended between life and death. You've been taking care of us, Jenny said with the simple gratitude of a 7-year-old. Making sure we stay together, making sure Christmas never ends. Every few years you come back to check on us. But I don't remember any of this, Sarah protested. You do, Margaret said kindly. But only while you're here. When you leave, the house lets you forget so you can have a normal life until it's time to visit again. The film showed Sarah's most recent visits, her inspections of the property as a real estate agent, her growing concern about the house's condition, her recommendations to the property management company. In each scene she was clearly trying to protect the house from being sold or demolished, though she seemed unaware of her own motivations. You've been preparing, Richard said. The demolition was scheduled to begin on December 26th. You knew we needed to find a way to continue the celebration somewhere new. Or to invite someone to stay with us permanently, Margaret added. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air in the house. What do you mean? The film reached its final frames. Scenes from today, December 15, 2024. Sarah watched herself approaching the house, noticing the Christmas decorations, entering through the basement window. She saw herself in the kitchen, examining the fresh cookies and milk. She saw herself in the living room, picking up the Polaroid photographs. And she saw what she had missed while she was living it. The Morrison family following her through the house, invisible but present, preparing for her arrival. They had been waiting for her. Every Christmas needs a family, Jenny said. And every family needs a home. We love our home, Jimmy added. But it's going to be torn down in 11 days. Unless, Margaret said, her shadow form turning towards Sarah, someone decides to stay with us. Someone who already belongs here. Someone who's been part of our family for 35 years. Richard stood up from his shadow chair. The equipment in the attic is still operational, Sarah. The process that made us part of the house can be repeated. You could stay with us. You could make sure our Christmas never ends no matter where we go. We could all be together forever, Jenny said, clapping her translucent hands with delight. Sarah backed toward the living room door, but it was still locked. The projector continued to hum, its light growing brighter, making the Morrison family's shadows more solid, more real. I need to think about this, Sarah said, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. Of course you do, Margaret said understandingly. It's a big decision. Why don't you stay for dinner? We always have Christmas dinner at 6 o'clock. We can talk more then. My colleague is coming. Mike from the property company. He'll be here any minute. The Morrison family exchanged glances, or at least, their shadow forms turned toward each other in a way that suggested silent communication. Mike Hartley, Richard said finally. Yes, we know Mike. He's been here before too, though not as often as you. He's been helping you protect the house. Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a text message from Mike. Sorry, running late. Emergency with another property. Won't be there until tomorrow morning. Everything okay? She hadn't heard her phone receive the message. In fact, looking at the timestamp, the message appeared to have been sent 3 hours ago, though she was certain she'd just received it. Time moves differently here, Jimmy explained as if reading her thoughts. We can slow it down when we need to. Christmas morning has been lasting for 36 years, but it only feels like a few hours to us. Your friend Mike will arrive tomorrow, Margaret said. Which gives us tonight to show you everything. To help you understand what we're offering. What about my life outside? My job, my apartment, my friends? They'll be fine, Richard said. Time will adjust. From their perspective, you'll simply have moved away, changed careers, started a new life somewhere else. People do that all the time. But here with us you'll have something most people only dream of. A family that will never leave you, never grow old, never die. Christmas that will never end. Sarah looked around the room, at the beautiful tree, the wrapped presents, the warm glow of candlelight. At the projection screen where the film had stopped on a frame showing all of them together, a family celebrating the most wonderful time of the year. It was tempting. More than tempting. "Can I see the rest of the house?" she asked. "Before I decide?" The Morrison family's shadow forms turned toward each other again. After a moment, Margaret nodded. "Of course. Jimmy, Jenny, would you like to give Sarah a tour?" The children's shadows jumped up eagerly. "Yes. We can show her our rooms." "And the attic," Jimmy added. "She'll want to see the projection equipment." "And the basement," Jenny said. "That's where we keep the Christmas decorations for the whole house." Richard stood as well. "I'll start preparing dinner. Margaret, perhaps you could show Sarah the memory room?" "What's the memory room?" Sarah asked. "It's where we keep everything," Margaret explained. "Every Christmas we've celebrated here, every visitor who's joined us, every moment of joy and love and family togetherness. You'll see." The living room door unlocked with a soft click. The Morrison family's shadows moved toward it, and Sarah followed. The memory room was in the basement, behind a door Sarah had assumed led to a utility closet. But when Margaret's shadow form guided her inside, she found herself in a space that seemed much larger than the house's foundation should have allowed. The walls were lined with shelves from floor to ceiling, and every shelf was filled with objects: photographs, home movies, personal belongings, recordings, journals. Each item was carefully labeled with dates and names, creating a vast archive of human experience. "This is where we keep the essence of everyone who's joined our Christmas," Margaret explained, her shadow form moving between the shelves like a librarian showing off her collection. "Not just the Morrison family but all our visitors over the years." Sarah approached one of the shelves and examined the items more closely. There were dozens of family photographs, all showing different people but all taken during Christmas celebrations. Home movies labeled with names and dates. Personal journals filled with handwritten accounts of Christmas memories. "How many people have come here?" Sarah asked. "Hundreds," Margaret said. "Most only stayed for a few hours or days, just long enough to experience a perfect Christmas morning before returning to their regular lives. But some chose to stay longer." "Like who?" Margaret's shadow gestured toward a section of shelving labeled "Permanent Residents." The items here were more personal: diaries, favorite books, cherished photographs, small mementos that people wouldn't part with willingly. "Mrs. Patterson was our first long-term guest," Margaret said, pointing to a collection that included knitting needles, reading glasses, and a worn Bible. "She came here in 1994, 2 days after her husband died. She'd been married for 60 years and she couldn't imagine celebrating Christmas without him." "What happened to her?" "She's still here," Margaret said simply. "Sleeping peacefully, dreaming of every Christmas morning she and her husband shared. She wakes up every December 25th, and they're all young again, opening presents together." Sarah moved along the shelves reading the names and dates. Johnson family 1998. Andrea Mills 2003. The Hendersons 2007. Dozens of people, all drawn to the Morrison house during their darkest moments, all choosing to stay rather than face the pain of living without the people they'd lost. "This isn't preservation," Sarah said slowly. "This is a collection." "We prefer to think of it as rescue," Margaret replied. "Every person here was in pain, Sarah. Grieving, lonely, hopeless. We gave them exactly what they needed: perfect happiness, perfect family, perfect love. But at what cost?" Margaret's shadow form turned toward her, and even though Sarah couldn't see facial features clearly, she could sense confusion in the movement. "Cost?" Margaret asked. "What cost?" "They're happy, Sarah. Perfectly, eternally happy. Isn't that what everyone wants? But they're not growing. They're not learning or changing or becoming anything new. Why would they need to? They have everything they could possibly want right here." Sarah continued exploring the memory room, growing more disturbed with each shelf she examined. In one corner she found a section labeled "Children" that made her heart ache. Teddy bears, picture books, drawings, all belonging to kids who had somehow found their way to the Morrison house over the decades. "Children?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. "Oh yes," Margaret said, her tone brightening. "We love having children visit. They adapt so well to our Christmas morning. They believe in magic naturally, so they don't question the impossible things they see here. But where are their parents? How did children end up here alone?" "Some came with their families," Margaret explained. "Others? Well, sometimes children run away from sad situations at home. They hear about our house somehow, through friends or older siblings or just because the house calls to them when they need it most." Sarah felt sick. Margaret, taking children away from their families isn't rescue. It's kidnapping. We would never take anyone who didn't want to come, Margaret protested, though her shadow form flickered uncertainly. Everyone who stays here chooses to stay. Do they? Really? Or do you just keep them here until they stop trying to leave? For the first time since entering the house, Sarah heard genuine silence from the Morrison family. No voices, no footsteps, no rustling movement. Even the ever-present Christmas music had stopped. Then quietly Jimmy's voice came from somewhere above them. Sarah? We want to show you something in the attic. Something we've never shown anyone else. Sarah looked around the memory room one more time, taking in the vast collection of interrupted lives, of people who had chosen preservation over progress, safety over growth, eternal comfort over the messy beauty of actually living. I'll be right up, she called back. But as she turned to leave, Margaret's shadow form blocked her path. Sarah, Margaret said, and for the first time, there was something like pleading in her voice. I know this looks wrong to you. I know it seems like we're trapping people. But you have to understand, we're saving them from so much pain. By stopping them from living their lives. By giving them better lives. Perfect lives. Lives without loss or disappointment or heartbreak. Sarah looked at Margaret's flickering shadow form, trying to see the woman she had been. A mother, a wife, someone who had loved her family so much that she'd accepted eternal imprisonment rather than risk losing them to the passage of time. Margaret, Sarah said gently, a life without the possibility of loss isn't a perfect life. It's a preserved specimen. And love that has to be maintained through imprisonment isn't love at all, it's obsession. Margaret's shadow form shuddered, and for a moment, Sarah thought she could see tears glistening in the translucent image. But if we let people go, Margaret whispered, if we let them grow and change and live their own lives, what if they forget us? What if they stop loving us? Then you'll know that what you had wasn't real love, Sarah said. Real love doesn't need chains to keep it secure. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 36 years of accumulated fear and longing and desperate need. Finally Margaret stepped aside. Go see what the children want to show you, she said quietly. But Sarah, please don't take our family away from us. Whatever else you decide, please don't leave us alone again. Sarah climbed the stairs to the attic, her mind reeling from what she'd seen in the memory room. At the top of the house, she found Jimmy and Jenny's shadow forms waiting for her beside a large piece of equipment she hadn't noticed during her earlier exploration. What is it? She asked. It's the master control, Jimmy said proudly. The machine that keeps everything running. Dad and Mom don't know we figured out how to operate it. Sarah approached the device, which looked like a combination of film projector, computer terminal, and something that belonged in a mad scientist's laboratory. Screens showed various views of the house, while dials and switches controlled different aspects of the temporal loop that kept the Morrison family suspended in their eternal Christmas morning. We learned how to use it by watching, Jenny explained. Every visitor who comes here gets recorded by the system, and we can watch the recordings over and over again until we understand what they're doing. That's how we learned about the outside world, Jimmy added. By watching everyone who comes here, listening to their stories, seeing what their lives are like. Sarah studied the control panel, beginning to understand the scope of what had been created here. This wasn't just a preservation system, it was a reality manipulation device, capable of altering time, space, and consciousness itself. Jenny, she said slowly, do you ever wonder what it would be like to grow up? To become teenagers, adults, to have your own families someday? The children's shadow forms looked at each other, then back at Sarah. We think about it sometimes, Jenny admitted. Especially when we watch the older visitors. They seem to know things we don't, to understand things we can't. But we're scared, Jimmy added. What if we grow up and we're not happy anymore? What if we become sad like the grown-ups who come here? Growing up means facing sadness sometimes, Sarah said. But it also means experiencing kinds of joy you can't even imagine yet. The joy of learning something new, of accomplishing something difficult, of falling in love, of creating something beautiful. She gestured toward the control panel. This machine has kept you safe from sadness, but it's also kept you safe from wonder, discovery, growth, change, all the things that make life worth living. But we have wonder, Jenny protested. We have Christmas morning wonder every single day. Do you? Sarah asked gently. Or do you have the same wonder, repeated endlessly until it's not wonderful anymore, Just familiar? The children were quiet for a long moment. Sarah, Jimmy said finally, if we helped you turn off the machine, if we let everyone go, would you stay with us? Would you help us learn how to grow up? Sarah's heart broke a little at the question. These children had been frozen in time for 36 years, watching the world change through the eyes of visitors but never experiencing change themselves. They were terrified of growing up but even more terrified of being abandoned. I can't stay forever, Sarah said honestly. But I can help you take the first steps. I can make sure you're not alone as you learn to live in the real world again. What about Mom and Dad? Jenny asked. They're so scared of losing us. They won't want to let us go. Then we'll have to show them that loving someone means wanting them to be happy, even if that happiness means they might change or grow beyond what you can control. Sarah turned to the control panel, studying the switches and dials. The system was incredibly complex, but she could see patterns in the design, ways to gradually reduce the temporal distortion, to slowly allow time to resume its normal flow. If I do this, she said, if I start shutting down the system, there's no going back. Once time starts moving forward again, your family will have to face everything they've been avoiding: aging, change, uncertainty, loss. But also growth, discovery, new kinds of happiness, Jimmy said, echoing Sarah's earlier words. And the possibility of real love, Jenny added. Love that chooses to stay, not love that's trapped. Sarah looked at the two shadow children, seeing in them something she hadn't noticed before: wisdom. Despite being frozen at ages 7 and 10, they had been observing human nature for decades. They understood, perhaps better than their parents, the difference between preservation and living. Are you ready? She asked. Both children nodded. Sarah reached for the master power switch. The moment Sarah's hand touched the control switch, the house began to change. The shift was subtle at first. The Christmas music slowed down slightly, the candlelight flickered with more natural rhythm, the ever-present scent of cinnamon and vanilla became less overwhelming. But in the memory room below, Margaret Morrison felt the change immediately. Richard, she called out, her shadow form solidifying with panic. Something's wrong. The loop is destabilizing. Richard's shadow appeared at the bottom of the attic stairs. Sarah, what are you doing up there? I'm setting you free, Sarah called back, her hand steady on the control panel as she began adjusting the temporal regulators. We don't want to be free, Margaret cried, her voice breaking with fear. We want to stay together. We want to stay safe. Being safe and being alive aren't the same thing, Sarah replied, continuing to modify the system settings. The house shuddered around them as 36 years of artificial time began to collapse back into the normal flow of reality. Richard's shadow form materialized in the attic, more solid and visible than Sarah had ever seen him. Stop this, he demanded. You're going to destroy us. You're going to take away everything we've built here. I'm not taking anything away, Sarah said. I'm giving you the chance to build something real. This is real. Richard protested. Our love is real, our family is real, our happiness is real. Your love is real, Sarah agreed. But your happiness is artificial. It's been maintained by a machine for 36 years. Don't you want to know if your love is strong enough to survive without technological support? She turned to face him, her hands still on the controls. Don't you want to know if your children will choose to stay with you when they have the freedom to leave? Richard's shadow form flickered with uncertainty. What if they don't? What if we set them free and they decide they don't want to be our children anymore? Then you'll know they were never truly your children, Sarah said gently. They were your prisoners. But if they choose to stay, if they grow up and become adults and still want to be part of your family, then you'll have something more precious than any artificial paradise. You'll have love that chose itself. Margaret's shadow appeared beside Richard's, tears streaming down her translucent face. But what if I'm not a good enough mother without the machine helping me? What if I make mistakes? What if I hurt them? Then you'll apologize and you'll learn and you'll do better, Sarah said. That's what real parents do. They make mistakes and grow from them. She gestured around the attic, with its decades of accumulated recordings and preserved memories. Look at all this. You've been so focused on preserving perfect moments that you stopped creating new ones. Your children have been 7 and 10 years old for 36 years. Don't you want to know who they might become if you let them grow? Jimmy and Jenny's shadows moved closer to their parents. Mom, Dad, Jimmy said, we want to try growing up. We want to see what it's like to change and learn new things. We'll still be your children, Jenny added. But we want to be real children, not preserved ones. Margaret looked at her family, her husband, her children, the people she had loved so much that she'd been willing to trap them all in amber rather than risk losing them to time. What about all our visitors? She asked. The people who came here for help, for refuge? If we shut down the system, what happens to them? They get their lives back too, Sarah said. They get the chance to face their grief, to heal, to find genuine reasons to keep living instead of hiding from reality. But some of them have been here for decades, Richard protested. Mrs. Patterson, the Chin family, all the others, they might not survive the shock of returning to normal time. That's a risk, Sarah admitted. But it's their risk to take. Don't you think they deserve the choice? The conversation was interrupted by a new voice from downstairs, a woman's voice but not Margaret's. Hello? Is someone up there? What's happening to the house? Sarah looked at the Morrison family's shadow forms. Who is that? Mrs. Patterson, Margaret whispered. She's never woken up before. She's always been one of the sleepers. They all listened as footsteps climbed the stairs, real footsteps, not the ethereal movement of shadows. A moment later, an elderly woman appeared in the attic doorway. She looked confused but alert, more solid and present than anyone Sarah had seen in the house except herself. Where am I? Mrs. Patterson asked, looking around at the equipment and the shadowy figures. What year is it? The last thing I remember, it was 1994 and I was... She stopped, her eyes focusing on Margaret's shadow form. Margaret Morrison? Is that you? But how are you? Mrs. Patterson, Margaret said, her voice filled with guilt and sorrow. You chose to stay with us. You chose to sleep and dream of Christmas mornings with your husband. Mrs. Patterson's face went through a series of emotions. Confusion, recognition, understanding, and finally, a deep sadness mixed with something that might have been relief. How long? She asked quietly. 30 years, Sarah said gently. Mrs. Patterson sat down heavily on a wooden crate, absorbing this information. 30 years, she repeated. I've been asleep for 30 years. You were happy, Margaret said desperately. You were with Harold again. You were young and in love and celebrating Christmas morning over and over again. I was hiding, Mrs. Patterson corrected, her voice gaining strength. I was so afraid of living without Harold that I chose to stop living altogether. She looked up at Sarah. You're shutting down the machine, aren't you? You're making us all wake up. I'm giving you the choice to wake up, Sarah said. You can go back to sleep if you want to. You can return to your dreams. But you can also choose to live again, to face your grief and work through it and find new reasons to be glad you're alive. Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands that showed every one of her 94 years, hands that had lived through joy and sorrow and loss and love. I want to see the sunrise, she said finally. A real sunrise, not the artificial dawn of Christmas morning. I want to see what the world looks like after 30 years. I want to know if my children had grandchildren, if my garden grew wild, if the seasons still changed the way they used to. She stood up, steadier than Sarah would have expected for someone her age. I want to remember Harold not by hiding from his death, but by living the life he would want me to live. Her words seemed to break something in Margaret's shadow form. The translucent figure became more solid, more human, as if Mrs. Patterson's courage was giving her the strength to become real again. I'm scared, Margaret whispered. So am I, Mrs. Patterson said, moving toward her and taking her shadowy hand. But I'm more scared of staying the same than I am of changing. Sarah turned back to the control panel. Around the attic, more voices were rising from throughout the house. Other visitors waking up, other preserved souls beginning to stir as the temporal loop continued to destabilize. It's happening whether we control it or not now, Sarah said. The system is breaking down. We can either guide the process or we can let it collapse chaotically. Richard looked at his family, his wife, his children, the woman who had been their first long-term guest. What do you all want to do? I want to grow up, Jimmy said without hesitation. I want to see what 10 years old feels like when it's real instead of repeated, Jenny added. I want to learn how to be a mother to children who change and grow, Margaret said, her shadow form becoming more solid with each word. I want to find out if our love is strong enough to survive in the real world, Richard said finally. Sarah smiled and began shutting down the temporal stabilizers one by one. As each system powered down, the house became more real, more present, more connected to the actual flow of time. The Christmas decorations began to show their age. The tinsel lost its luster, the ornaments showed chips and cracks, the tree began to droop slightly. But somehow this made everything more beautiful, not less. Real beauty, Sarah realized, comes from imperfection, from the knowledge that beautiful things don't last forever. As the final system shut down, the Morrison family's shadow forms solidified completely. They were still recognizable as the people they had been in 1988, but they looked older now, not 36 years older, but aged as they would have been if they had lived naturally, faced challenges, grown and changed and adapted to life's ups and downs. Richard had gray at his temples and laugh lines around his eyes. Margaret's hair was silver and her face showed the wisdom that comes from genuine experience. Jimmy looked like a young man in his 20s, tall and confident. Jenny appeared to be in her late teens, beautiful and bright with possibility. They were real again. Fully, completely, beautifully real. "How do you feel?" Sarah asked. "Uncertain," Richard said, looking down at his solid hands with wonder. "But good uncertain. Like we're standing at the beginning of an adventure instead of the end of one." "Hungry," Jimmy laughed. "Actually hungry for the first time in decades." "Excited," Jenny said, her adult voice still carrying traces of the 7-year-old's enthusiasm. "I want to learn everything I missed. I want to see movies and read books and meet people and maybe go to college." "Grateful," Margaret said, reaching out to touch Sarah's face with real, warm fingers. "Thank you for showing us the difference between love and fear." Mrs. Patterson, who had been quietly watching the transformation, spoke up. "What happens now? Where do we go from here?" Sarah looked around at the group of people. No longer shadows or preserved specimens but living, breathing human beings with their own choices to make and lives to live. "Now," she said, "you go home. All of you. You rejoin the world, you reconnect with the people you left behind, you start living again. It won't be easy but it will be real." "And you?" Richard asked. "What will you do?" Sarah thought about her empty apartment, her meaningless job, her lonely holidays. Then she thought about the family she had just helped save, not by preserving them but by setting them free. "I think," she said, "I'll stick around for a while. Make sure you all adjust okay. Maybe help other people who are struggling to choose living over hiding." As dawn broke over the real world outside, not the artificial dawn of Christmas morning 1988, but the genuine dawn of December 16, 2024, the Morrison house stood quiet and normal for the first time in 36 years. Inside, a family was learning to be real again. Outside, snow was falling and somewhere in the distance, church bells were ringing. It wasn't Christmas morning anymore. It was something better. It was today. The end.